Have you ever done something for the umpteenth time, but one day you forgot to do one of the crucial steps and you failed miserably? Like you forgot to connect the mic to the camera and your video sounded terrible, but you found out only about 1 hour later? Or you forgot that one ingredient and in the end your beautiful cake you wanted to present to Aunt Mary for her birthday looked like an extra from The Walking Dead, right? And of course, it was clear what you forgot, and all you could say was, duh. Stupid. Yep, we've all been there. Hi everyone, this is Patrick. Today let's talk about a tool that we all have heard quite a lot about, and we know how important and valuable it is, but we rarely use it. Yes, I'm talking about checklists. Ta-da! Checklists have been around for ages, and we all know that certain industries live by them. And we all use some checklists already, maybe a shopping list or a to-do list, huh? Yet most of us haven't even touched the power of checklists by now, and that is really sad. But why should we use checklists in the first place? Well, in 2009, Atul Gawande, a surgeon and health researcher, wrote the bestseller on checklists called The Checklist Manifesto. I highly recommend this if you haven't read it by now, and I will link to it in the description. In it, he argues that implementing checklists is one of the most vital tools for increasing the quality of any work, while also massively decreasing the failure rate. As an example, in 2006, Gawande assisted the World Health Organization in solving a problem. Surgery was increasing rapidly worldwide, but surgical patients were getting unsafe care so often that surgery was a public danger. WHO needed a global program that would reduce avoidable harm and deaths from surgery. Gawande states that very often nowadays, failure doesn't happen because we don't know better, which would be due to ignorance, but because we know better but don't apply our knowledge, which would be due to ineptitude. There are a lot of reasons, but most often it comes back to someone being overwhelmed by complexity and the choices to take. Gawande and his team came up with a 19-point checklist, results of a pilot study at 8 hospitals worldwide using the Safe Surgery checklist exceeded expectations. Rates of major complications for surgical patients in all 8 hospitals fell by 36%. Deaths fell by 47%, infections fell by almost half, and the number of patients having to return to the operations room because of problems fell by a quarter. And similar results could be seen by implementing checklists in all kinds of environments. We know that some of the greatest achievements, like building a skyscraper, flying a plane, or going to the moon and soon maybe Mars, all were centered around the heavy use of checklists. Now we know all of this, but most of us aren't doing open heart surgery or flying a plane or even attempting space travel. Still, I argue that using checklists in normal life can have an equally dramatic impact if applied correctly. So, let's find out how you can make checklists a major tool for growth in your life. But first, let's find out what stops us from using checklists in the first place. Now, there are several reasons why we avoid using checklists. There's obviously the reason of laziness. Also, sometimes the feeling of urgency stops us from creating checklists. Both of them are actually bad excuses, because a checklist could help us clear our mind and become clear about the steps which would help us break down the problem and help us overcome inertia and laziness in the first place. Also, if something becomes urgent, it is very often because we haven't taken care of the problem before, and a checklist might have enabled us to prevent the urgency in the first place. But the biggest problem which stops us from using a checklist is a feeling of embarrassment. We have this romantic belief that high achievers don't follow a checklist. Geniuses are seen as spontaneous improvisers, which should not be bound by a stupid checklist. By using a checklist, we internally label ourselves as stupid or not creative. Now here's what Atul Gawande has to say about this. The checklist gets the dumb stuff out of the way, the routines your brain shouldn't have to occupy itself with. Did the patient get her antibiotics on time? And lets it rise above to focus on the hard stuff. Where should we land? So now it's time to rise above the dumb stuff to get to the important stuff by using a checklist. First, types of checklists. There are basically 2 types of checklists. 1, do confirm. Here you just do the steps, and afterwards you use the checklist to make sure you haven't forgotten or neglected anything. And second, read, do. Here you first read the checklist and then do the steps accordingly. This is a recipe style where you follow the checklist step by step. Now this is what most people only think about when you mention a checklist, the steps or items you put a check mark in front once they are done. But the question is actually, what do you put on a checklist? Do you put down every step? To make this decision, you have to realize that a checklist is not a guide. So, whom do you write the checklist for? What does he or she or you already know? A guide is a step-by-step description of a process to get to a certain result. Basically, you can place a guide in nearly anyone's hand and he can do the process if he has no or only basic knowledge of the topic. A checklist is a reminder for the person knowing about the process already to not forget any important steps while neglecting any description on how to do the steps. Of course, you can put some guidance into your checklist. For instance, if some of the steps are only used occasionally and you might forget them. As an example, I have the audio compressor settings in my video checklist as a screenshot included. So don't include any intermediate steps which you know already and focus on crucial parts, which if you forgot them, the end result will suffer. Here often less is more. Include as much description as you need, but not more. If the checklist is also used for others, you might prefer to reference to a more descriptive user guide, YouTube video, etc. at certain steps. Once you have all the steps or items of a checklist, you have to think about the structure of the checklist itself. The steps or items in the checklist should always be written down in the order how they are taken. Now this should be done for a simple shopping list where it is useful to bring all groceries together to the top, if your supermarket has the groceries at the entrance, to even more complex lists. If the lists get a bit longer, you should also consider whether you can group items together or whether they belong to different stages. An example, in a video production you usually have different stages like script development, prepping the studio, shooting A-roll, shooting B-roll, editing, publishing. It makes sense to group the steps of these stages together and put the stages in chronological order as well as the steps within the stages. Indentation, headers and bolding is a great way to show which steps belong to which group. So the idea is that a checklist should be read and acted upon from the top to the bottom. If you need to jump around all the time, it is a case of a bad checklist structure. When do you use the checklist? Sometimes you have to define at which point you have to use the checklist, especially with the do confirm type of checklists. This is called the pause point. These could be vital if a successful continuation of the process can only be guaranteed if all previous steps have been checked. So consider in your workflow where such a point might be. You can have one or several pause points, at different stages maybe, on a checklist. A checklist is basically an algorithm. So what you do with it is you are programming your future self. And like with any kind of programming, you are coming to a point where you have to make decisions. You need to check or test something. And depending on the results, you need to do or not do something, or you need to go to another step within your checklist. I use this by simply creating if-then-else statements in my checklists, and indented underneath I write what I will do if the check is true or to which designated point I will jump within the checklist. Here's an example from my video checklist. In my audio setup, do I want to use the lavalier mic? If so, use double lightning adapter, insert the lavalier microphone and restart Filmic, which is the software I use. I had some problems if I inserted the microphone before starting the app. Then check sound by tapping on the mic and see the amplitude spiking. And then jump to start recording. And I do have a label, start recording. All the points we mentioned up till now are applicable to pen and paper checklists as well as digital ones. But digital checklists have some benefits to them. You can integrate links and automation to them. Basically, any website or folder you want to open, you can insert the URL in a checklist and it opens up automatically in most apps. You could insert web pages, folders, files, playlists, locations, and much more simply by using the built-in link features. I, for instance, have a specific playlist for focusing, and I have the link to it in my focus checklist. By using simple automation tools like shortcuts, you can also start apps and do even more complex tasks. So even if you follow every step, your checklist won't be perfect the first, second, or even third time. And that is normal. Like everything in life, we first need to suck at stuff before we can make it good by improving upon it. A checklist is not final. You can always improve on it and tweak it. If you find something that isn't working with your list and your process, adapt and improve upon it. I still find little things to tweak in some lists which are several years old. So that's it for now. If you like this video and would get more cool tips and tricks, then please hit the like and subscribe button below. Also, stay tuned for more cool videos about integrating Apple Mail into your processes on all your devices. See you next time. Bye.